Ayubowan, Vanakkam. I'm Vayoni Dimel. This is Boston Lanka News, bringing you news, views, and entertainment from Boston and USA. American musician falls in love with Thammattama. Unseen footage of alleged extrajudicial killings of Tamils by the military. Yal Devi film on how ethnic conflict spilled over to Los Angeles. Michael Bolonik, an American musician, visited Sri Lanka in 2005 for tsunami relief, and according to him, that visit changed his musical destiny. Michael began to master Sri Lankan drum techniques and has written a book on Sri Lankan drumming. Michael joins with Boston Lanka to talk more about his interest and views on Sri Lankan drumming. Michael, could you first share with us how you developed an interest in Sri Lankan drumming? How did you start playing the Thammattama?
My first visit to Sri Lanka was in 2005, helping out with tsunami relief. For those 2 months, tsunami relief was my focus. However, I also heard some of the music when I was there too, and it was fascinating. I had just finished a degree in music education, and I was about to begin a master's in ethnomusicology, which is study of music and culture. So I was in that gap period in between, and the music fascinated me. It was distinctly different from Indian music, even though much of Sri Lankan culture seemed so similar to Indian, at least to me as a Westerner who had never been to South Asia before. So, as I began the degree in ethnomusicology, I tried looking up whatever I could about Sri Lankan music, and at that time there was almost nothing in English. Nothing talking about how to play, nothing giving anything more than the names of a couple instruments. And that fascinated me. At this point, I had been there once. I had a little bit of experience in the country, and now I knew where to focus my research for my degree, Sri Lanka.
You were in Sri Lanka, and we know that you trained drumming under Piyasara Shilpadipati. Could you share with us that experience?
Absolutely. It was a really wonderful time. Piyasara sir is a wonderful teacher, and as a Western vocalist, I'm especially thankful for how patient he is. He's a very humble man, very gentle and calm. Vocalists in the West were not known for having good timing. So he's very patient, very gentle, very calm. And he picks up a drum, and you wonder, where did that come from? That's incredible. He's such an amazing player. And Piyasara sir is a fantastic teacher as well. We had private lessons every few days, a weekly group lesson that I attended with a number of other students. The group lesson would usually range from absolute beginner right up to advanced players, each working on their next pattern or rhythm. The way the lessons typically worked, you have a pattern or rhythm to work on. Once that's mastered, the next part's given, and now you have both patterns to work on, and so on. And it's done entirely through memory, entirely through rote. I studied the basics of Get the Bear as well, but it was on the Thammattama that I really flourished, the patterns and the rhythms getting increasingly complex as we went. The group lessons were a great way to gauge how I was doing, because I might think I was playing something really hard and really complex, and I may have heard comments as such by people walking by and felt great about how I was doing. Then at the group lesson, I'd have a 10-year-old who's been studying with PSR for years, and he'd watch and say, "That was nice, Uncle, but can you do this?" And he'd play something far beyond anything I could do. And this was really nice for motivating me, as well as keeping me humble.
Michael, you have written a book about Sri Lankan drumming, specifically about Thammattama. Do you think there is interest among the non-Sri Lankans to learn Sri Lankan drumming?
There is absolutely somewhat of an interest among non-Sri Lankans, definitely. More so the more they hear of it. Through increased presence on YouTube, on the internet, through radio, through TV, through performances that they see here in the States. People are learning music from places that are new to them. Much of this started being seen in the mainstream with the Beatles' famous trip to India in the late 20th century, and that has definitely continued. Generally speaking, people's tastes and desires to hear music from a particular region increase upon hearing different and intriguing styles. That's why there are programs like The Beat Authority on NPR, where they showcase music from around the world that, to an audience in America, has a good beat, but is still very characteristic of that country, and then it gets more people listening to music from that country. There's a desire among many musicians also to have as broad a range as possible to draw from. Upon learning the materials in this book, they could be playing something completely different, like they could be playing a jazz piece, and then break out into a Sri Lankan rhythm. Drum ensembles and marching bands are always looking for new, unique sounds and patterns to play. And I mentioned in this book that if you don't have a Thammattama, a Western drummer can substitute a floor tom and a snare drum that has the snare disengaged, or use one of those standard Western marching band toms, the marching drum that you see in the parade going with 3 separate drum heads. People could use that as a substitute for a Thammattama if they're here in the States. A book on learning to play the Thammattama using Western notation as an aid would also be appealing to Sri Lankans living abroad. Canadian or American Sri Lankans, for example. Your kid's getting bigger, knows some music from school, maybe even percussion from school. This is a way to help him or her to appreciate something of their culture, something of their roots.
I understand that you recently played Thammattama in an Indian wedding. How did that go?
Absolutely, the Indian wedding. That was a great time. It was quite a unique experience for everyone involved. As for the traditional custom, the groom entered on a white horse. Normally, this would be led by a dhol player. They hired a dhol player from Canada to come and do the wedding. The only problem, he didn't have his passport on him. And also, he's a Sikh gentleman, and so he had the turban on. Trying to enter the U.S. without a passport and while wearing a turban means that not only was he not allowed to enter the U.S., he was actually detained by Homeland Security. So, I was DJing this wedding, the Mendi party on Saturday, and the ceremony on Sunday. And on Saturday, they asked if I could play on Sunday for the procession, since their drummer was being detained by Homeland Security. But it was fun, it went well, and for most of the people there, it was actually their first time seeing Sri Lankan drums. So it was really good for getting the word out about Sri Lankan culture, and a lot more people heard it and appreciated it and thought it was something really neat that they hadn't seen before.
Thank you, Michael. That was Michael Bolonik from United States. Britain's Channel 4 showed last week the unseen footage of alleged extrajudicial killings of Tamils by the military. British Foreign Office Minister Alistair Burt said he was shocked by the horrific scenes in the documentary, which contained convincing evidence of violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. The government of Sri Lanka categorically denies the allegations. Sri Lankan High Commission in UK issuing a statement said that the government of Sri Lanka is concerned about the distress the images in the Channel 4 film, aired without any guarantee of their authenticity, might have caused to the viewers, particularly to those belonging to different communities in Sri Lanka. The statement went on saying that the Channel 4 film has the potential to incite hatred amongst different communities in Sri Lanka, including future generations, and thereby adversely affect the ongoing national reconciliation process. Meanwhile, the Amnesty International USA has launched an online petition to Secretary Hillary Clinton asking the US government to support an international war crimes investigation in Sri Lanka. Now, news at a glance. The ferry service between India and Sri Lanka was commenced last week. The service was halted 30 years ago due to security reasons. The Dutch authorities have launched a thorough investigation to uncover the prominent role LTTE leaders in the Netherlands played in financing the civil war in Sri Lanka. Dutch investigators are in Sri Lanka to conduct inquiries and to interrogate former and current LTTE leaders in Sri Lanka. Majority of the cabinet ministers are of the view that the Cricket Interim Committee should be immediately dissolved due to mismanagement and alleged misappropriation of funds. Cabinet turned down a request made by the Sports Minister for a grant of Rs 2 billion from the consolidated funds for the Sri Lanka Cricket Board. One parent of the dead Saudi infant had pardoned Rizana Nafiq, Sri Lankan housemaid who is in death row in Saudi Arabia for the death of the infant. The Sri Lankan government is ready to pay any amount of money as blood money to rescue Rizana, according to Foreign Employment and Welfare Minister Dylan Pereira. Yal Devi, film done by Sri Lankan expatriates in Los Angeles, shows how the ethnic conflict that Sri Lanka experienced for the last 30 years had spilled over to those settled in the United States. Yal Devi was co-directed by Dr. Sumedha Jayasena and Bhadradi Mahinda Jayatilaka. It will be screened on Saturday, June 18th and 19th in Jackson Heights, Queens, New York, in aid of people living in poverty in Dimbulagala, Sri Lanka. Boston Lanka joined with Yal Devi director Dr. Sumedha Jayasena. Dr. Jayasena joins us from Los Angeles. This film was produced and screened prior to May 2009. Now that terrorism is over in Sri Lanka, do you think the message in the film is still relevant to Sri Lanka?
So, Vayoni, I think the message that we are trying to send through this film is more appropriate now than it has been in the past when the war was going on. So when the war was going on, and what we had was hope, and that's hope. The hope was the peace was the hope, and right now, what we have achieved is peace. So the war is over, and I'm sure more than 100,000 lives have been saved. We don't know how many lives will be sacrificed if the war were to be continued. And when we produced this film, I never anticipated that the war will be over. And I thought that this is going to be a time capsule that will relive throughout another decade or so at least. But fortunately, the war is over. Now it is the time for reconciliation and to bring peace through the engagement of the 2 or 3 ethnic parties. So we have to live in harmony with Tamils, Sinhalese, and Muslims, and other minorities. So, and the other point that we should remember that history repeats itself. And we have seen this in Sri Lanka. In 1971, the JVP time, the majority Sinhalese youth took arms against the prevailing government. And that was repeated in 1989. And so we should be mindful about the present situation where where we assume that the peace and the harmony will continue, but we have to work at it. And otherwise, this can be repeated. Any other element can rise on these aspirations. So we need to. This could be defined as a political solution, or I personally think that this is a social solution. And if we can bring the social solution, that means every ethnic group could have a job indiscriminately, obtain a job, and then have a land without any restrictions to be owned anywhere in this little island, and then also practice their religion. So if you have those 3, then I think we could have a prosperous and harmonious life. So the message is very relevant even in this era where reconciliation will go on.
Any plans for a second film soon?
Thanks for asking about it. So one, when entertained this experience of making a film, will not stop there. So I am really interested in bringing a second film, and I'm working on this issue, on this theme. And right now, I'm working on a script, and let's see how it goes.
Thank you, Dr. Jayasena. That was Dr. Sumedha Jayasena from Los Angeles. That concludes our news edition. We meet you again with another news edition of News, views, and entertainment from Boston and USA. Till then, goodbye.